The watch was wrapped in a piece of cloth so old it had gone soft, like something you'd find at the bottom of a cedar chest that hadn't been opened in 30 years. My grandmother pressed it into my hands the night before she died, and she said, "Don't let your uncle touch this. It belongs to you." I was 22. I didn't know what that meant yet. I tucked it into my nightstand drawer. Then I went back to the hospital. She was gone by morning. My uncle found out about the watch 3 days later, at the wake. I don't know how. Maybe he went through her room before the rest of us got there. He had a key, and he had always moved through the world like it owed him access. He walked up to me while I was standing near the coffee table with a paper plate of food I hadn't touched, and he said very quietly, "I'll need that watch back. It was supposed to come to me." I told him Grandma gave it to me herself. He smiled the way he always smiled when he thought someone was being naive. "She wasn't well, sweetheart. She didn't know what she was saying." She had been sharp as a tack until 48 hours before she died. But I had learned by then not to argue with my uncle in public. I said I'd think about it. He said good. He patted my arm like we'd settled something. I never gave him the watch. I want to be honest about who my uncle is because I've spent a long time trying to make him make sense. And I think the truest thing I can say is this. He is a man who has always believed that wanting something entitled him to it. He's in his late 50s now, divorced twice, charming at parties, the kind of person who remembers your birthday and borrows money and never pays it back and makes you feel ungrateful for noticing. My mother loved him because he was her big brother. My grandmother loved him the way you love a wound that won't close, with exhaustion, with guilt, with a tenderness that costs you something every time. He was the executor of her estate. That's the part I want you to sit with for a second. She had named him executor years before she got sick, back when he was just difficult and not yet dangerous, and by the time she understood the difference, she was too tired to go back and change it. Or maybe she thought it didn't matter. Maybe she thought the estate was simple enough that even he couldn't complicate it. She was wrong. The estate sat in probate for almost 8 months. My mother kept calling the attorney's office and being told everything was normal, everything was fine. Small estates. Just take time. My cousin, my uncle's daughter, stopped returning my texts. My uncle showed up to Thanksgiving that year in a new truck. A very nice truck. I kept the watch in my nightstand. I didn't wear it because I was afraid of losing it, and I didn't look up its value because I was afraid of caring about the money. I just kept it. My grandmother's name was Lorraine. She grew up in a small town in Tennessee and moved to Cincinnati when she was 19 to work as a seamstress. She met my grandfather at a church social, married him at 21, and spent the next 4 decades being the kind of woman who sent birthday cards 2 days early and kept a jar of hard candies by the front door for anyone who came to visit. My grandfather died when I was 9. I barely remember him. She never remarried. What I know now, and what I did not know when she pressed that watch into my hands, is that my grandfather had been a careful man. He came from nothing, the way people really did come from nothing back then. And he had spent his whole working life at a manufacturing plant outside the city and put a small amount of money into a savings account every single month for 40 years. He bought a few shares of stock when he had a little extra, nothing dramatic, just steady. When he died, he left my grandmother a house that was paid off and a financial life that was quiet and organized, and compared to the chaos my uncle created around everything he touched, very nearly invisible. I didn't know about the watch until after she died. I mean, I knew about the watch. I'd seen it my whole life in the glass case in her bedroom, sitting next to a rosary and a photo of my grandfather in his army uniform. It was a Hamilton, a dress watch, gold-filled, the kind of thing men wore to church in the early 1950s. I always assumed it was sentimental, a keepsake, something worth nothing except to the people who remembered the man who wore it. I was cleaning out my nightstand about 4 months after the funeral, just trying to organize, trying to get through the low gray grief of those months by doing small useful things. And I found the watch wrapped in its cloth, and I sat on the edge of my bed, and I thought about her face when she put it in my hands. The way she had held my wrist for a second after, the way she had said his name Not your grandfather, but his actual name, Walter, like she wanted me to hear it. She had said, Walter wanted you to have it. It was always for you. I had nodded and I had not asked what she meant because I thought I understood and I had been wrong. I called a jeweler, not to sell it. I want to be clear about that. I called because I wanted to understand what she had given me, and the jeweler told me the watch itself was in remarkable condition, well preserved, possibly worth somewhere in the range of $800 to $1,200 depending on the buyer. He also said there was something he noticed engraved on the caseback, a set of initials and a number, that he had seen before on pieces from a specific small batch run from the early 50s. He told me some collectors looked for exactly this reference number, and then he said, did she leave anything else with it? Sometimes these pieces came with paperwork. I went back to the cloth. I had assumed the cloth was just cloth. It had been folded the way you fold a handkerchief, tight and neat, and I had unfolded it once and looked at the watch and folded it back. I hadn't paid attention to the way the weight sat slightly wrong, slightly too heavy on one end. Folded inside the lining, stitched in and then carefully cut loose so it could be removed, was a piece of paper. Old, folded into quarters. I opened it with my hands shaking a little, not because I knew what I was going to find, but because there was something about the care of it, the deliberateness, that told me it mattered. It was a certificate of ownership, a bond, a United States Series EE savings bond issued in 1987 in the face value of $10,000 made out to me. Just me, not my mother, not my uncle. Me, by full legal name, which was unusual because I was 4 years old in 1987. I sat on the floor. I called my boyfriend. We'd been together 3 years by then. A steady, quiet man named Garrett, who is an accountant and therefore the right person to call when you find a 38-year-old savings bond inside a watchcloth. And I read him what was on the paper, and he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "Do you know if there are more?" I didn't know. He came over that night with his laptop, and we started looking into Series EE bonds from that era. He explained that bonds issued in 1987 would have reached full maturity, that the interest compounds, that what starts as $10,000 doesn't stay $10,000. He looked up the Treasury calculator while I sat next to him on the couch, and he typed in the numbers from the certificate, and when the result came up on the screen, he turned the laptop toward me without saying anything. The number was not $10,000. I'm not going to say the exact number here, but it was significantly more. Decades of compounding interest on a bond that was never redeemed, never touched, just left to grow in a cloth inside a watch case in a glass cabinet in a bedroom in Cincinnati. I thought about my uncle's new truck. I thought about 8 months of probate. I thought about my cousin who had stopped returning my texts. I said, I need to talk to an estate attorney. I want to tell you about the meeting with the attorney because it changed the way I understood everything that had come before it. Her name was Sandra, and she worked out of a small office in a building near downtown Cincinnati that smelled like coffee and old carpet. She was in her late 40s, wore reading glasses on a chain, and had the specific manner of someone who has spent 25 years watching families destroy each other and has made peace with it. She looked at the bond. She looked at the documentation my grandfather had left. There was more, it turned out, a small brokerage account I had not known about, also in my name, also opened in 1987. Because my grandfather had started this the year I was born and had apparently never told anyone. And she looked at me over her glasses and said, "Did your grandmother ever mention this to you?" I told her about the watch, about the cloth, about what she had said in the hospital. Sandra nodded slowly. She said, "I think your grandfather did this deliberately. I think he set it up this way so that it would bypass the estate entirely and go directly to you, because that's the thing about assets titled directly in someone's name. They don't go through probate. They don't go to the executor. They go to the named beneficiary. My uncle, as executor, had no legal authority over anything that had been set up to transfer to me directly. He just hadn't known it existed." Sandra said, "If your uncle is aware of this, he may contest it. We should move quickly." I asked what move quickly meant. She said it meant filing a claim on the brokerage account, redeeming the bond, and establishing a paper trail that was clean and legal and completed before my uncle had any reason to look in this direction. I asked if what we were doing was above board. She looked at me like I had asked if the floor was solid. You're claiming assets that are legally yours, in your name, that were established with the intent of going to you. Yes. This is above board. I signed the paperwork. What happened over the next 3 weeks was quiet and procedural and, from the outside, would have looked like nothing at all. Sandra filed the claim. The brokerage transferred the account. The Treasury processed the bond. Everything went into a new account in my name at a bank I had chosen myself. A bank in a different city from the one my uncle used. A bank where no one knew my family. My mother found out. She called me crying, not angry, just overwhelmed. She had not known about any of it. She kept saying, he loved you so much, even when you were a baby. I cried too. I think about my grandfather sometimes, this man I barely knew, making these choices when I was 4 years old, trusting that the watch would get to me, trusting that I would look closely enough to find what he had left. He trusted, right? My uncle found out in October. I don't know how, exactly. My best guess is that the probate attorney mentioned something, or maybe my cousin found a thread and pulled it. What I know is that on a Thursday evening in October, I got a phone call and it was him, and his voice had that particular quality it gets when he is trying to sound calm and is not, in fact, calm. He said, I've been hearing things. I said, I don't know what you've heard. He said the assets should have been disclosed to the estate. He said my grandfather had been an old man and hadn't understood what he was doing. He said I had an obligation as part of this family to discuss this with him before taking any action. He said he was disappointed in me. That word, disappointed. I had been hearing that word my entire life and it had always worked. It had always made me smaller, made me apologize, made me hand over the thing I was holding and say I'm sorry, take it. I was 27 by then. I had Sandra's number in my phone. I had a folder of documentation so clean and thorough that she had said, honestly, this is the most straightforward case I've seen in years. I had an account in my name in a city 2 hours away. I said, the assets were legally mine, Uncle. They were always legally mine. There was nothing to disclose. He told me I was being naive. I said, I have an attorney. If you want to pursue this, you're welcome to contact her. And I hung up. He did contact her. He sent a letter through his own attorney, not a great attorney I gathered, based on the letter's content, claiming the asset should have been included in the estate inventory. Sandra responded with the documentation, the transfer dates, the titling records, everything. His attorney did not write back. The thing I've thought about most in the months since is the cloth. My grandmother knew where the bond was. She had kept it hidden in the watch case for years, probably decades. She had known my grandfather's intention and she had protected it, had made sure it was still there when she needed to pass it on, had made sure I would find it, had sewn it into the lining with enough care that it survived 38 years and a house full of a man who moved through rooms like he was inventorying them. She did all of that without telling anyone. She did it alone. There's a version of this story where I feel angry about the secrecy, about the legal complexity, about the fact that I almost didn't look inside the cloth. There are probably nights where I let myself sit in that version, but mostly what I feel is this enormous, quiet gratitude for a grandfather who saw me before I was old enough to know myself, who made a decision in 1987 that I would be taken care of, who trusted a piece of paper and a piece of cloth and a watch in a glass case to carry that decision forward through decades of time and family and everything that happened in between. He was right about me. Garrett and I got engaged in the spring. Not because of the money, we had talked about it before any of this happened, but I will tell you that standing in the kitchen one morning, looking at the ring on my finger, thinking about my grandfather in his army uniform in that photograph, I felt something settle in me that had been unsettled for a long time. My uncle did not come to the engagement party. My mother did. She held my hands before dinner and looked at me for a long moment, and she said, she was so proud of you. You know that, right? She was so proud of you. You know that, right? She was so proud. I do know that. I keep the watch on my dresser now. I wear it sometimes, carefully, on occasions that feel significant, the way you wear something that belongs to a story longer than your own. The jeweler cleaned it for me, and the gold has a warm, quiet glow. under certain light, and sometimes I put it on and feel the weight of it on my wrist, and think about a man I barely knew, who knew somehow exactly what he was doing. The water in Cincinnati is gray and cold in November. The maple in my grandmother's old backyard has probably turned by now, red and ordinary and briefly perfect, the way things are when no one is watching. I look at the watch and I think, he was watching. He always was. I think about my grandfather sometimes, a man who worked a factory floor for 40 years, who never had much, who put a little away every single month and never made a big deal about it. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud. He just kept showing up and doing the right thing quietly for decades, and when he died, he left behind something that outlasted everything my uncle tried to take. That's the part that gets me. Not the money, not the bond, not the legal victory, though all of it mattered. What gets me is the patience of it. My grandfather made a decision in 1987, the year I was born, and he trusted that decision to hold. He trusted the cloth, the watch, my grandmother's hands, and eventually mine. He didn't need to see the outcome. He just did what was right and let time do the rest. I spent a long time being afraid of my uncle. That's the honest version. He was the kind of person who filled a room with his certainty, who made you feel like questioning him was a character flaw, and I had learned somewhere along the way to make myself small around him, to hand things over, to say I'm sorry, take it doesn't matter that much anyway. I had been doing that my whole life, and I didn't even know how automatic it had become until I was sitting on my bedroom floor, holding a piece of paper that had my name on it, and I felt something in me go very still and very clear. The clarity wasn't anger. I want to be precise about that. It was more like finally seeing the shape of something that had always been there. My grandfather had been precise, had been careful, had understood things about this family long before I did, and he had built me a door. I just had to be willing to walk through it. That took something. It took Sandra, yes, and the documentation, and Garrett sitting next to me with his laptop. But before any of that, it took me deciding that what was mine was worth protecting, that I wasn't going to apologize for it, that being decent to someone doesn't mean handing them everything they demand. I think that's the thing nobody tells you about integrity. It's not just about being honest with other people. It's about being honest with yourself, about knowing what you deserve, about not betraying the people who loved you carefully enough to leave you something before they left. My grandmother sewed that bond into the watchcloth with a needle and thread. She kept that secret for years alone in a house where my uncle had a key. She did that because she understood that some things need protecting. She had the wisdom to see the threat clearly and the steadiness to outlast it without making a scene. I try to carry that. The steadiness. The willingness to go slowly and do it right instead of loudly and fast. The understanding that the people who shout the most in any room are usually the ones with the least ground to stand on. My uncle's letter never got a second response. There was nothing to argue about. The paper trail was clean. When you do things carefully and honestly, there isn't much room for someone else's noise. I wear the watch on days that feel like they matter. I think about Walter, my grandfather, a man I barely knew. And I think he would have liked Garrett. I think he would have been glad to see me standing in my own life, not apologizing for it. He gave me more than money. He gave me proof that doing the right thing, slowly and without applause, is enough. That it lands, that it reaches. It reached me.